On the morning of her 17th birthday, Alina stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, carefully adjusting the straps of her new designer dress. Sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, catching the sparkle of the fabric as she turned from side to side, admiring herself. Her phone buzzed constantly on her bed with birthday messages, party confirmations, and comments from friends hyping up the celebration she had been planning for weeks. Everything about today had to be perfect. Perfect dress. Perfect photos. Perfect party. Perfect life. At least, that was the image Alina wanted everyone to see. Behind her, the small bedroom door creaked open slowly. Her mother, Mira, stepped in quietly, holding a small, neatly wrapped box covered in pale blue paper. Mira's uniform from her housekeeping job was slightly wrinkled, and her hands still smelled faintly of cleaning soap. She had rushed home during her short break, just to wish her daughter happy birthday before heading back to work. Her face carried that familiar mixture of exhaustion and warmth that never seemed to leave her. "Happy birthday, Beta," Mira said softly, offering a gentle smile as she held out the small gift. Alina glanced at the box through the mirror before turning around. Her expression tightened for a split second, barely noticeable unless someone knew her well. She forced a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She took the box slowly, weighing it in her hands as if already judging what might be inside. "You didn't have to get me anything," Alina said, though her tone didn't sound grateful. It sounded impatient. "I know it's not much," Mira replied carefully, "but I saw it and thought of you." Alina peeled open the wrapping paper without much care. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm. It was delicate and pretty in its own way, but it wasn't from a luxury brand, and it certainly wasn't something Alina could imagine showing off to her friends. She stared at it for a few seconds, her lips pressing into a thin line. "It's nice," she said, placing it back into the box almost immediately. Mira noticed the hesitation. She noticed everything actually, but she had learned over the years how to swallow her disappointment quietly. "You don't like it?" she asked gently. "It's fine, Mom," Alina said quickly, walking back toward her mirror and picking up her makeup brush. "It's just, not really my style." There was a short silence that filled the room, heavier than either of them wanted to acknowledge. Mira nodded slowly, clutching her hands together. She looked around the room at the posters, the ring light, the expensive shoes lined neatly along the wall, many of which had been gifts from Alina's wealthy friends or their families. Mira had worked extra shifts for years just to afford the rent and keep Alina in a good school where she could have better opportunities. She had always believed her sacrifices were building a brighter future for her daughter. "Your party is tonight, right?" Mira asked, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "Yeah," Alina replied, focusing on applying her eyeliner. "It's at the rooftop lounge downtown. Everyone's coming." "That sounds beautiful," Mira said. "I wish I could see it." Alina hesitated before responding. "It's mostly for friends and their families, Mom. It's kind of fancy." The words hung in the air, sharp but disguised under a casual tone. Mira nodded again, pretending she understood, even though her chest tightened slightly. She had expected this answer, yet it still stung. Later that afternoon, Alina's friends arrived to help her get ready. The room filled with laughter, perfume, and loud music as they took selfies and complimented each other's outfits. Mira stayed in the kitchen, quietly preparing snacks she thought the girls might enjoy before they left. She arranged the plates carefully, hoping maybe Alina would ask her to join them for a moment. Instead, one of Alina's friends glanced toward the kitchen and asked loudly, "Is your mom home? I thought you said she works all day." Alina rolled her eyes slightly, unaware that Mira could hear from the doorway. "Yeah, she does. She just came back for a bit. She works as a cleaner at this hotel nearby. She's always bringing work smell home." The girls giggled, not out of cruelty but out of careless teenage amusement. Still, the sound cut deeper than any insult. Mira froze in place, holding the tray of snacks, her smile slowly fading as she turned back toward the kitchen. Alina continued, lowering her voice but not enough. "It's honestly so embarrassing sometimes. Like all your parents are business owners or doctors or something. And then there's mine." The words slipped out effortlessly as if she had been holding them in for years. Her friends didn't respond much after that, but the moment had already passed, leaving behind an uncomfortable silence that Alina quickly covered with more chatter about the party. When it was time to leave, Mira stood by the door holding Alina's small purse that she had forgotten on the table. "You forgot this," she said, handing it over carefully. "Thanks," Alina replied quickly, already distracted by her phone. "You look beautiful," Mira added, her voice filled with genuine pride. Alina paused for half a second before nodding. Yeah. I know, she said, turning toward the waiting car outside. As the car pulled away, Mira remained standing by the doorway, watching until it disappeared around the corner. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, the same one she had said every birthday since Alina was born, wishing for her daughter's happiness, safety, and success. Then she slowly closed the door behind her and returned to the quiet apartment. Meanwhile, the rooftop lounge glowed with golden lights as guests began arriving. Music pulsed through the air, cameras flashed, and Alina quickly became the center of attention. Compliments poured in about her dress, her makeup, her style. She laughed loudly, posing for photos, making sure every angle looked flawless. Her social media notifications exploded with likes and birthday wishes. Everything was exactly how she had imagined. But as the night went on, something unexpected started unfolding. A surprise guest arrived. Someone Alina never thought would step into her perfectly curated world. The moment this person walked through the entrance, whispers spread across the room, and the cheerful energy shifted in a way no one could explain. Alina's smile froze as she turned toward the doorway, her heart beginning to pound for reasons she didn't yet understand. And standing there, under the glowing rooftop lights, was the one person who was about to change everything she believed about status, pride, and the meaning of being truly rich. The music continued to pulse through the rooftop lounge, but for Alina, the sounds began to fade into the background. Conversations blurred into distant noise as her eyes stayed locked on the entrance. The crowd slowly parted, revealing the unexpected guest more clearly. A tall, well-dressed woman stepped forward, her presence calm yet powerful, as if she naturally belonged in any room she entered. She wore a simple but elegant outfit, nothing flashy, yet it carried a quiet confidence that drew attention without effort. Alina frowned slightly, trying to place her. The woman looked familiar, but Alina couldn't figure out why. Around her, some of the adults at the party straightened their posture, whispering quietly among themselves. Even the staff members seemed unusually attentive as they guided the guest inside. "Do you know her?" one of Alina's friends asked, leaning closer. Alina shook her head, though something in her stomach twisted with uncertainty. "No, I don't think so." The woman continued walking slowly through the crowd, exchanging polite smiles with people who greeted her respectfully. She seemed to be searching for someone. For a brief moment, her eyes swept across the party before landing directly on Alina. The look was not angry, not even serious, but it was intense enough to make Alina feel strangely uncomfortable. Before Alina could react, her friend Ria rushed toward her, excitement glowing on her face. "Alina, do you realize who just arrived?" she whispered loudly. "Who?" Alina asked, trying to sound casual even though her curiosity was growing. "That's Mrs. Kavya Malhotra," Ria said. "My dad talks about her all the time. She owns several luxury hotels and charities. She's like a huge name in business and social work." Alina blinked, surprised. She had heard that name before. Everyone in the city had. Kavya Malhotra was known for building one of the biggest hospitality chains in the region and funding several programs for underprivileged families. But Alina had no idea why someone like that would appear at her birthday party. "Maybe she's here with someone's parents," another friend suggested. Alina nodded slowly, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the woman's gaze had been directed only at her. Across the lounge, Mrs. Malhotra paused near the refreshment table, speaking politely with a few guests. Her voice was soft, but people listened carefully when she spoke. There was a grace in the way she carried herself, a kind of warmth that made people comfortable around her. Yet beneath that warmth, there was a quiet seriousness in her expression, as if she carried stories and memories that most people couldn't see. As Alina watched, she felt an odd sense of pressure building in her chest. She didn't understand why. She tried distracting herself by checking her phone, scrolling through birthday posts and comments. Compliments filled her screen, calling her beautiful, stylish, and lucky. Normally, messages like these would boost her confidence instantly. But tonight they felt strangely empty. Meanwhile, miles away, Mira had returned to her job at the hotel. She moved quickly through the corridors, pushing her cleaning cart as she checked each room assigned to her. Her mind, however, wasn't fully focused on her work. She kept thinking about Alina's party, imagining the decorations, the music, and her daughter smiling among friends. Despite the hurt she had felt earlier, Mira's heart still overflowed with pride. She often told herself that Alina deserved a life filled with comfort, even if she herself never experienced it. As Mira entered one of the hotel's luxury suites, she paused for a moment, looking around the grand room. The polished floors, the shining chandeliers, and the breathtaking city view through the glass windows reminded her how different her world was from the lives of the guests she served every day. She carefully began organizing the space, folding towels and adjusting decorations left behind by previous visitors. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. She wiped her hands before checking it, hoping maybe Alina had sent a message or photo from the party. But the screen showed only a work notification reminding her about an additional shift scheduled later that week. Mira sighed softly, slipping the phone back into her pocket before returning to her tasks. Back at the rooftop lounge, Alina tried to enjoy herself again. She laughed as her friends danced and she posed for more photos, making sure every shot looked perfect. But her attention kept drifting toward Mrs. Malhotra, who was now speaking with Ria's parents. The conversation seemed polite, yet serious enough to make Alina curious. After a while, Ria returned to Alina, her expression slightly puzzled. "This is so strange," she said quietly. "What happened?" Alina asked. "My mom said Mrs. Malhotra specifically asked about this party," Ria replied. "She wanted to know who organized it and who the birthday girl is." Alina's eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Why would she care about that?" "I have no idea," Ria said, glancing back toward the woman. "But she seemed very interested when she heard your name." Alina felt her pulse quicken again. She tried to laugh it off. "Maybe she just likes attending social events." "Maybe," Ria said, though her tone suggested she wasn't fully convinced. Across the room, Mrs. Malhotra slowly excused herself from her conversation and began walking toward the center of the lounge again. Her movements were unhurried, yet purposeful. The golden lights reflected softly around her, and guests instinctively stepped aside as she passed. Alina's throat tightened as she realized the woman was moving directly toward her group. Conversations around them began to lower, as if people sensed something unusual about the moment. Even the music, though still playing, felt less noticeable compared to the growing tension. "Alina," one of her friends whispered nervously, "I think she's coming to talk to you." Alina straightened her posture, quickly checking her reflection on her phone camera. She adjusted her hair, trying to appear confident and composed. Inside, however, her thoughts raced with questions she couldn't answer. Mrs. Malhotra stopped just a few steps away, her calm eyes studying Alina carefully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt longer than it actually was, stretching between them like a thin thread ready to snap. "You must be Alina," Mrs. Malhotra said finally, her voice warm but steady. "Yes, I am," Alina replied, forcing a polite smile. "I've heard a lot about you," the woman continued, her gaze thoughtful. Alina felt a strange chill run through her, though she tried to maintain her composure. "I'm sorry, have we met before?" she asked. Mrs. Malhotra's lips curved into a faint smile, but it didn't fully reach her eyes. "Not exactly," she said. "But I have known someone very important in your life for a very long time." Alina's confusion deepened. Her friends exchanged curious glances, sensing that this conversation carried more weight than a simple introduction. Around them, a few guests subtly leaned closer, pretending to stay engaged in their own discussions while clearly listening. Mrs. Malhotra glanced briefly toward the city skyline before returning her attention to Alina. "Tell me," she said gently, "how well do you think you truly know your mother?" The question landed like a sudden drop in temperature. Alina's smile faded slightly as her mind struggled to process what she had just heard. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. The music, the lights, the laughter around her suddenly felt distant, as if the world had shifted into a slower, heavier rhythm. And as Mrs. Malhotra continued to watch her patiently, Alina began to realize that this conversation was about to uncover truths she had never even considered. Alina blinked, caught off guard by the question. For a moment, she forced a small laugh, hoping to lighten the mood. I know her like anyone knows their mom," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "She works a lot. She worries too much. That's pretty much it." Mrs. Malhotra studied her expression carefully, as if measuring the honesty behind her words. "That sounds like what many children think about their parents," she replied calmly. "But sometimes the life we see is only a small part of their story." Alina shifted slightly, feeling the eyes of her friends and a few nearby guests settling on her. She hated feeling unsure in front of people. Her birthday party was supposed to be filled with fun, laughter, and attention for all the right reasons. Instead, this conversation was making her feel exposed in a way she couldn't explain. "I'm not sure what you mean," Alina said, her voice polite but cautious. Mrs. Malhotra glanced around briefly, noticing the growing curiosity in the crowd. Maybe this isn't the best place for a long conversation, she said softly. But I wanted to meet you tonight. I felt it was important. Alina's heart beat faster. Important for what? The older woman hesitated slightly, as if choosing her next words very carefully. Let's just say, your mother and I share a history that you might not be aware of. Alina felt a strange mix of confusion and irritation. She had never heard her mother mention anyone named Kavya Malhotra. As far as she knew, her mother's world was limited to work, home, and occasional visits to nearby markets. The idea that her mother could somehow be connected to one of the city's most successful businesswomen didn't make sense. Before Alina could respond, one of her friends gently touched her arm. Maybe she means your mom worked at one of her hotels or something, the friend whispered, trying to ease the tension. Alina nodded slightly, clinging to that explanation. Did my mom work for you? She asked directly. Mrs. Malhotra's faint smile returned, but this time it carried a trace of sadness. Yes, she said slowly. But not in the way you might be thinking. The answer only deepened the mystery. Alina crossed her arms lightly, trying to regain control of the conversation. Then how? Mrs. Malhotra opened her mouth as if to speak, but then paused again. She glanced toward the edge of the rooftop, where the city lights stretched endlessly into the night. Your mother once made a choice that changed more lives than you can imagine, she said quietly. Alina frowned. What kind of choice? Instead of answering directly, Mrs. Malhotra looked back at her. Tell me something first, she said. What do you think wealth really means? The question felt unexpected and slightly frustrating. Alina hesitated before replying. It means security, success, having a good life. Being able to afford things without worrying all the time. Mrs. Malhotra nodded slowly. That's a common answer. And what do you think it means? Alina asked, her curiosity mixing with defensiveness. The woman's gaze softened. Sometimes real wealth comes from sacrifices people never see. Before Alina could process that statement, Ria's parents approached, politely greeting Mrs. Malhotra and pulling her into another brief conversation. The moment gave Alina a chance to breathe, but it also left her mind spinning with unanswered questions. What was that about? Ria asked immediately. I have no idea, Alina admitted, her voice lower than usual. She keeps talking like she knows my mom personally. That's weird, another friend said. Your mom never mentioned anything like that, right? Alina shook her head, feeling unsettled. She suddenly realized how little she actually knew about her mother's past. Mira rarely spoke about her younger years or any family connections. She always changed the subject whenever Alina asked questions about their history. Across the city, Mira finished cleaning the final room of her shift. Her feet ached, and her shoulders felt heavy from hours of physical work. She signed out quietly and stepped outside the hotel, pulling her shawl closer as the cool night air brushed against her face. She glanced at the brightly lit entrance, watching luxury cars arrive one after another. For a brief moment, she wondered how Alina's party was going. As Mira began walking toward the bus stop, her phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from an unknown number. She opened it slowly. I met Alina tonight. We need to talk soon. Kavya. Mira froze mid-step. Her hands trembled slightly as she reread the message. The name alone brought back memories she had tried to bury for years. She looked around as if expecting someone to appear beside her. Her chest tightened with a mix of worry and fear she couldn't ignore. Back at the rooftop lounge, the party continued, but Alina's excitement had faded. She tried to focus on her friends, joining them on the dance floor and smiling for photos, yet her thoughts kept returning to the strange conversation. Every time she caught a glimpse of Mrs. Malhotra speaking with other guests, her curiosity grew stronger. After a while, Alina stepped aside near the balcony railing, staring down at the glowing city streets below. She replayed the woman's words in her mind, a choice that changed more lives than you can imagine. The phrase echoed louder the more she thought about it. What if she's exaggerating? Alina muttered to herself, trying to dismiss the feeling. But deep inside, something told her this was not just a casual story. Moments later, she sensed someone standing beside her. She turned to see Mrs. Malhotra again, her expression calm but thoughtful. I hope I didn't disturb your celebration too much, the woman said gently. It's okay, Alina replied, though her voice carried a trace of tension. I just don't understand what's going on. That's fair, Mrs. Malhotra said. And you deserve clarity. But some truths are complicated. They need the right time to be told. Alina sighed softly, gripping the railing. You keep talking like my mom has some big secret. She's just my mom. She works hard. That's it. Mrs. Malhotra studied her carefully. Have you ever wondered why she works so hard without ever complaining? Lots of parents do, Alina said quickly. Yes, Mrs. Malhotra agreed. But not all parents carry the kind of responsibility your mother chose to carry. Alina felt frustration rising. Then just tell me what you mean. Mrs. Malhotra hesitated again, clearly struggling between speaking and staying silent. Your mother once had an opportunity that could have changed her entire future, she said finally. And she gave it up, for a reason connected to you. Alina's breath caught slightly. Connected to me? That doesn't make sense. Before Mrs. Malhotra could explain further, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting subtly. I'm sorry, she said. I need to take this call. She stepped a few feet away, leaving Alina alone with her racing thoughts. The city lights flickered below, but Alina barely noticed them anymore. Her mind kept circling one question: what could her mother possibly have sacrificed, and why had she never spoken about it? Across town, Mira sat quietly on the late-night bus, staring out the window as the message from Kavya remained open on her phone screen. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, but her eyes held a deep worry she couldn't hide from herself. She whispered softly, almost to the darkness outside, "Not yet, she's not ready to know." And as the bus disappeared into the night traffic, both mother and daughter sat miles apart, unknowingly standing at the edge of a truth that was slowly and inevitably coming closer to the surface. Alina stood frozen near the balcony as the party lights shimmered around her, but the excitement that once filled her chest had been replaced by a heavy, restless feeling. She watched Mrs. Malhotra speaking quietly on her phone across the rooftop, her calm posture somehow making everything feel more serious. The music, laughter, and camera flashes behind Alina now felt distant, like she was standing in a completely different world from everyone else celebrating her birthday. Her mind kept replaying the words she had just heard. An opportunity. A sacrifice. Something connected to her. None of it made sense, yet it stirred a strange discomfort she couldn't shake. Alina prided herself on knowing how her life worked. She believed she understood every piece of her story, her struggles, her dreams, her goals. But suddenly, it felt like someone had opened a door to a hidden part of her life that she had never even noticed before. "Hey birthday girl, everyone's looking for you," Ria said, walking over with a concerned smile. "They're about to bring out the cake." Alina forced a nod. "Yeah, I'm coming." As she followed her friends back toward the center of the rooftop lounge, she noticed how easily everyone slipped back into celebration mode. The DJ raised the volume, colorful lights danced across the floor, and guests gathered around the large decorated cake placed on a shining table. Her name glowed in bright letters across the frosting, surrounded by expensive decorations and sparklers ready to be lit. Everyone cheered as Alina stepped forward, but her smile felt heavier than before. She glanced through the crowd and spotted Mrs. Malhotra standing quietly near the back, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly and Alina felt her stomach twist again. The candles were lit, and the room dimmed slightly as the crowd began singing. Alina closed her eyes for a moment, preparing to make her birthday wish. Normally she would wish for success, popularity, or the newest luxury items she dreamed of owning. But tonight, a different thought crossed her mind. She found herself wondering what her mother was doing at that exact moment. She imagined Mira sitting alone at home or working another late shift, probably exhausted but still thinking about her daughter's happiness. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. She opened her eyes quickly and blew out the candles, forcing herself back into the celebration. Applause and cheers filled the air as her friends hugged her and took photos. Yet the feeling of tension refused to fade. As the party continued, Alina slipped away from the crowd and walked toward a quieter corner of the rooftop where soft lights glowed above a small seating area. She needed space to think. She pulled out her phone, staring at her mother's contact name on the screen. Her finger hovered over the call button, but she hesitated. What would she even say? She had never been the kind of daughter who asked deep questions about her mother's life. Before she could decide, her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped slightly as she opened it. "It's time you know the full truth. Your mother deserves to be seen for who she truly is. Kavya." Alina's breath caught. She looked up immediately, searching the rooftop for Mrs. Malhotra. The woman was no longer near the back of the room. Instead, she was slowly walking toward the private lounge area near the rooftop entrance, as if inviting Alina to follow. Without thinking too much, Alina slipped her phone into her purse and quietly moved through the crowd, her pulse quickening with every step. The laughter and music behind her faded again as she reached the quieter section of the rooftop where only a few guests stood talking. Mrs. Malhotra waited near the glass doors, her posture calm but serious. "Thank you for coming," she said gently as Alina approached. "I want answers," Alina said, her voice lower but steady. "You keep saying things about my mother like she's hiding something huge. I need to understand what you mean." Mrs. Malhotra nodded slowly. "You deserve to know parts of her story. But I also believe some truths carry emotional weight. You need to be ready for that." "I'm ready," Alina said quickly, though her hands felt cold. The older woman studied her face carefully as if searching for hesitation. "Years ago," she began softly, "your mother and I were connected through a moment that changed both our lives. At that time, she was given a chance to step into a life filled with opportunity, stability, and financial security." Alina's chest tightened. "Then why didn't she take it?" Mrs. Malhotra looked toward the night sky for a brief moment before answering. "Because of a decision she made when you were very young." Alina felt her throat dry. "What decision?" Before Mrs. Malhotra could respond, a staff member approached her quietly, whispering something urgent in her ear. The woman's expression shifted slightly and she nodded. "I need to step away for a few minutes," Mrs. Malhotra said, turning back to Alina. "But this conversation cannot stay unfinished. Some truths have already waited too long." Alina felt frustration rise sharply. "Please don't disappear again. I can't just go back to the party pretending everything is normal." Mrs. Malhotra placed a reassuring hand gently on Alina's shoulder. "I won't disappear," she said softly. "But there is someone else who needs to be part of this conversation." Alina frowned. "Who?" "Your mother," Mrs. Malhotra replied quietly. The words sent a sudden wave of panic through Alina's chest. "She's working tonight. She wouldn't even come here." Mrs. Malhotra's gaze remained calm. Sometimes life brings people exactly where they need to be, even when they don't plan it. Meanwhile, across the city, Mira stepped off the late-night bus, her heart pounding as she reread Kavya's message again. She had spent the entire ride battling her thoughts, knowing that the past she had carefully hidden was now standing dangerously close to her daughter's world. She reached her apartment building but stopped at the entrance, staring at her reflection in the glass door. Her hands trembled slightly as she whispered to herself, "Maybe I should have told her long ago." Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a short message with a location pin, the rooftop lounge where Alina's party was still in full swing. Below the location, another message appeared. "She deserves to hear it from you." Mira's breath grew shallow. She looked down at her simple uniform, still wrinkled from her shift, and wiped her tired eyes. Fear, guilt, and determination battled inside her chest as she stared at the glowing city skyline. Back at the rooftop, Alina stood alone near the glass doors, her mind spinning with questions she never thought she would ask. The laughter from the party echoed behind her, but she barely heard it anymore. Her entire world suddenly felt fragile, like it was balancing on a truth she wasn't prepared to face. Minutes passed slowly as she waited, her heart racing with every passing second. Then the elevator doors at the rooftop entrance slid open with a soft chime. Several guests glanced casually toward it, but Alina's attention locked onto the doorway instantly. And as a familiar figure stepped out, wearing the same tired uniform and holding her purse tightly in nervous hands, Alina felt her breath catch in her throat, realizing that the moment she had never expected had finally arrived. The moment Mira stepped onto the rooftop, she felt dozens of unfamiliar eyes pass over her before returning to their conversations. The bright golden lights, the expensive decorations, and the polished crowd made her feel like she had stepped into a world that was never meant for her. She clutched her purse tightly, her fingers trembling as she searched for Alina through the sea of people. Her heart pounded louder with every step, not from the fear of being judged, but from the fear of losing something far more important. Alina stood frozen near the glass doors, her mind struggling to accept what she was seeing. Her mother looked smaller under the glowing lights, her tired uniform standing in sharp contrast to the elegant dresses and formal suits around her. For a brief moment, embarrassment flashed across Alina's face out of pure habit, the same reaction she had carried for years. But this time, that feeling was immediately followed by confusion, guilt, and a strange nervousness she couldn't control. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Alina asked, her voice barely steady as Mira slowly approached her. Mira tried to smile, but her lips trembled slightly. I got a message saying you needed me," she replied softly, her eyes filled with both worry and determination. Before Alina could respond, Mrs. Malhotra stepped forward from behind them, her presence calm but firm. I asked her to come, she said gently. Alina turned sharply toward her. Why would you do that without telling me? Because some stories should be heard from the person who lived them, Mrs. Malhotra replied quietly. Mira's eyes widened slightly as she looked at Kavya. For a few seconds neither of them spoke, but the silence between them carried years of memories, choices, and emotions that words could barely hold. Alina noticed the look they shared and felt her chest tighten again. You two really know each other? Alina whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Mira lowered her gaze, clearly struggling with the moment she had always feared. Yes, she admitted slowly. Guests nearby began to notice the tension forming near the entrance. Conversations softened as curious glances shifted toward the three women standing under the bright rooftop lights. The music continued, but the atmosphere around them felt heavier, like the air itself was waiting for something to unfold. Alina crossed her arms slightly, her confusion turning into frustration. Then why didn't you ever tell me? She asked her mother. You never talk about your past. You never talk about anything before me. Mira swallowed hard, her hands tightening around her purse. I wanted to protect you, she said quietly. Protect me from what? Alina pressed, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to stay calm. Before Mira could answer, Mrs. Malhotra spoke again, her tone steady but carrying emotional weight. From a truth that could have changed how you saw everything, including her sacrifices. Alina shook her head, overwhelmed. Everyone keeps saying that word, sacrifice. What does it even mean? She just worked hard like millions of other parents do. Mira closed her eyes briefly, as if those words pierced deeper than Alina realized. When she opened them again, they shimmered with emotion she was trying desperately to control. There was a time, Mira began slowly, when our lives were very different. Alina watched her carefully, her heart racing. Years ago, before you were born, I worked with Kavya at a training program for hotel management, Mira continued. We both had dreams of building successful careers, traveling, and creating something big. Alina blinked in surprise, struggling to imagine her mother in that life. Kavya was always brilliant and confident, Mira said, glancing briefly at her. And I was given an opportunity to join a partnership project that could have changed everything for me. Alina leaned forward slightly. Then why didn't you take it? Mira's breathing slowed as she prepared to speak. But before she could continue, Mrs. Malhotra gently added, because the situation wasn't that simple. Alina's gaze shifted between them, her patience thinning. Then explain it to me. Please. I deserve to know. Mrs. Malhotra hesitated before speaking again. At the time, that project required Mira to move abroad for several years. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, financial stability, career growth, and a completely different future. Alina felt her pulse spike. So why didn't she go? Mira's eyes filled with emotion as she finally spoke the words she had buried for so long. Because I had just learned that you were coming into my life. Alina's breath caught, but before she could respond, Mrs. Malhotra continued, her voice carrying another layer of truth that changed the atmosphere instantly. There's something else you need to understand, she said carefully. Mira didn't just turn down the opportunity. She also gave up something that many people would never imagine giving up. Alina's heart pounded louder. What do you mean? Mrs. Malhotra took a slow breath, clearly choosing her words with care. The partnership project included ownership shares in what later became my hotel chain. Mira was offered a significant share at the beginning, but she transferred her rights before the company even launched. The words landed like a sudden shockwave. Alina stared at her mother, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. You could have owned part of this huge business? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mira nodded slowly, her eyes lowering toward the floor. And you just gave it away? Alina asked, disbelief filling every syllable. I didn't give it away, Mira said softly. I made a choice. Alina felt her emotions spiral between shock, confusion, and something deeper she couldn't name yet. Around them, the rooftop lights shimmered, the city skyline glowing beautifully, but the celebration now felt distant and unreal. Mrs. Malhotra stepped closer, her expression serious. There's still more to this story, Alina. The choice your mother made didn't just change her life or mine. It affected yours in ways you still don't understand. Alina's chest rose and fell quickly as she tried to steady herself. Then tell me everything, she said, her voice trembling but determined. Mira looked at Kavya, then back at her daughter. Fear, regret, and love battled visibly across her face. She opened her mouth, ready to finally reveal the truth she had carried for 17 years. But just as she began to speak, A loud announcement echoed through the rooftop speakers as the party host called Alina back to the main stage for a special surprise performance planned by her friends. The sudden interruption shattered the fragile moment, drawing attention back toward the celebration. Guests began calling Alina's name excitedly, unaware of the storm building around her. The bright lights flashed again and music surged louder, pulling her toward the center of the party she had once been desperate to perfect. Alina stood between her mother and the crowd, her heart torn between the life she had built and the truth that was slowly rising to the surface. A truth that was far bigger, deeper, and more life-changing than she had ever imagined. Alina stood frozen as her friends called her name again, their voices filled with excitement and celebration. The stage lights flashed brighter, and the DJ announced the surprise performance prepared just for her birthday. But the sound felt distant, like it belonged to someone else's life. Her eyes stayed locked on her mother, who looked like she was carrying years of unspoken truth in her trembling silence. "Go," Mira whispered gently, forcing a small smile. "They're waiting for you." But Alina shook her head slowly. For the first time in her life, the party, the attention, and the image she worked so hard to maintain no longer felt important. "No," she said quietly. "I'm waiting for you to finish." Mrs. Malhotra watched the moment unfold, her expression softening slightly as she nodded toward Mira, silently encouraging her to continue. Mira took a deep breath, her hands still trembling as she looked directly into her daughter's eyes. "When I found out I was going to have you, my entire world changed overnight," she said softly. "The partnership offer required me to leave the country for years. At that time, I had no support system, no family close enough to help raise a newborn child. If I had accepted it, you would have grown up without me beside you during your earliest years." Alina felt her throat tighten as she listened. "I knew it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance," Mira continued. "Financial stability, success, security, everything people dream of. But when I thought about holding you for the first time, I couldn't imagine building a life that didn't include watching you grow every single day." Alina's eyes slowly filled with tears, though she tried to blink them away. "I transferred my share in the project because I knew I couldn't commit to both," Mira said. "Kavya tried to convince me to hold on to it, but I made my decision. I chose to stay. I chose to be your mother first." The words settled heavily between them. Alina felt memories begin to flood her mind. Her mother waking early every morning, packing lunches, working double shifts, sewing torn school uniforms late at night, always smiling through exhaustion. Moments she had once dismissed now returned with painful clarity. "But, you struggled so much," Alina whispered. "You could have had a completely different life." Mira nodded gently. "Yes. But I never saw it as losing something. I saw it as gaining something far more important." Alina felt guilt rise sharply in her chest, remembering her careless words earlier that day, the embarrassment she had felt toward the woman standing in front of her now. Mrs. Malhotra stepped forward slightly, her voice calm but emotional. "Your mother never told you because she didn't want you to feel like you owed her anything. She wanted you to grow freely without the weight of her choices shaping your dreams." Alina covered her mouth as tears finally slipped down her cheeks. "I mocked you," she said to her mother, her voice breaking. "I said things I didn't even mean. I was ashamed of you." Mira quickly shook her head, stepping closer and gently holding her daughter's hands. "You are young, Alina. You were trying to fit into a world that values appearances. I never blamed you for that." The music and party sounds behind them continued, but several guests had begun to notice the emotional moment unfolding. Conversations quieted as people watched silently, sensing something meaningful was happening beyond the celebration. Alina tightened her grip on her mother's hands. "You gave up wealth, success, everything, for me, and I treated you like you weren't enough." "You were always enough for me," Mira said softly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke as emotions settled between them. Then Alina stepped forward and wrapped her arms tightly around her mother, holding her as if she were afraid to let go. The hug carried years of misunderstanding, guilt, and unspoken love, finally finding its way to the surface. Guests nearby began to quietly applaud, not loudly or dramatically, but with genuine respect for the emotional honesty unfolding before them. Even Ria wiped away a tear as she watched her friend. As the moment softened, Mrs. Malhotra cleared her throat gently, drawing their attention again. "There is one more thing you both need to know," she said. Alina and Mira slowly turned toward her. "Years ago, when Mira transferred her shares, she made me promise something," Mrs. Malhotra continued. Mira's eyes widened slightly, surprised. "Kavya. You asked me to wait until Alina turned 18 before revealing it," Mrs. Malhotra said gently. But tonight, seeing everything unfold, I believe it's time. Alina frowned, confused. Reveal what? Mrs. Malhotra reached into her purse and carefully pulled out a sealed envelope. She held it out toward Alina. Before transferring her ownership, your mother placed a small portion of her original shares into a trust, Mrs. Malhotra explained. She insisted that it remain untouched and confidential until you were old enough to understand its meaning. Alina stared at the envelope, her heart pounding again. A trust? For me? Mira looked shocked. Kavya, I told you that was never meant to. You told me it was meant to give her a choice, Mrs. Malhotra said gently. The same choice you once had. Alina slowly accepted the envelope, her hands shaking as she held it. Are you saying, this belongs to me? Mrs. Malhotra nodded. It represents a share in the company your mother helped build in its earliest stage. It's not about money alone. It's about the legacy of her sacrifice and the future she wanted you to have. Alina felt overwhelmed, her emotions spiraling between gratitude, shock, and disbelief. She looked at her mother, tears still glistening in her eyes. You never told me, you kept this hidden all these years? Mira's voice trembled. I didn't want your life to be shaped by what I gave up. I wanted you to build your own dreams, not feel pressured to carry mine. Alina stared at the envelope again, realizing how deeply her mother had loved her, not just through struggle but through quiet strength and selfless planning. But before the emotional moment could settle completely, Mrs. Malhotra spoke again, her voice carrying a final unexpected weight. There is one condition tied to that trust, she said. Alina looked up, confused. What condition? Mrs. Malhotra's expression grew serious. The shares become fully accessible only if you personally choose to work within the company or continue the charitable foundation your mother helped design alongside it. Alina blinked in surprise. A foundation? Mira lowered her gaze slightly, clearly nervous. It was meant to support families where parents have to choose between career opportunities and raising their children, like I once did. Alina felt her chest tighten as the meaning settled in. The envelope in her hands suddenly felt heavier, not because of financial value, but because of the responsibility and emotional legacy it carried. The party lights continued to glow, the music played, and guests waited for the birthday celebration to resume, unaware that Alina's life had just shifted in ways she never imagined. Standing between her mother, her future, and a choice that mirrored the same life-changing decision Mira once faced, Alina realized that the meaning of wealth, success, and family had become far more complicated than she had ever believed. And as she slowly looked down at the sealed envelope resting in her trembling hands, she understood that the next decision she made wouldn't just shape her own future. It would define the legacy of her mother's sacrifice for generations to come. Alina stood quietly, staring at the sealed envelope in her hands as the noise of the birthday party slowly returned around her. The music rose again, her friends called her name, and the rooftop lights continued glowing across the city skyline. But something inside her had shifted completely. The life she believed was built on status, popularity, and appearance now felt small compared to the truth she had just learned about her mother's sacrifice and hidden strength. She looked up at Mira, noticing details she had ignored for years. The tiredness behind her gentle eyes, the roughness of her hands from long hours of work, and the quiet dignity she carried despite everything she had given up. For the first time, Alina didn't see embarrassment. She saw courage. I don't even know what to say, Alina whispered, her voice filled with emotion. Mira smiled softly, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. You don't have to say anything right now. Mrs. Malhotra stepped back slightly, giving them space, but her calm presence remained reassuring. You both deserve time to process everything, she said gently. Decisions like these aren't meant to be rushed. Alina nodded slowly, still holding the envelope tightly. She turned toward the party crowd where her friends waited, their excitement now mixed with curiosity. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure whether to return to the celebration or stay wrapped in the emotional storm she was still trying to understand. Then she did something no one expected. She walked toward the center of the rooftop stage where the microphone still stood waiting for her birthday speech. The DJ lowered the music as guests noticed her serious expression. The cheerful noise faded into quiet anticipation as Alina stood under the bright spotlight. She took a deep breath, glancing back once at her mother before turning toward the crowd. Thank you all for coming tonight, she began, her voice slightly shaky but honest. I planned this party to celebrate my birthday and show what I thought was the perfect life. But tonight, I learned something that completely changed how I see success, family, and real wealth. Guests listened closely, sensing the sincerity in her words. I used to think being rich meant having expensive clothes, big parties, and social status. she continued. But I just found out that the richest person in my life has been standing beside me all along, and I didn't even realize it. She looked toward Mira, her eyes filling with tears again. My mother gave up her own dreams, opportunities and financial success just to raise me with love and support, Alina said, her voice breaking slightly. And instead of appreciating her, I sometimes made her feel like she wasn't enough. A heavy silence spread across the rooftop as her words settled deeply into the crowd. I'm sorry, Mom, Alina said, stepping down from the stage and walking directly toward Mira. Not just for today, but for every time I failed to see your strength. Mira shook her head gently, tears streaming down her own face as she pulled Alina into another tight embrace. This time, the hug felt lighter, filled with understanding instead of regret. Several guests quietly wiped their eyes, moved by the moment. Ria stepped forward, smiling warmly at Mira. You raised an incredible daughter, she said sincerely. Mira smiled shyly, clearly overwhelmed by the attention but grateful for the kindness. As the emotional moment settled, Mrs. Malhotra approached them again, her expression proud yet calm. I believe this is exactly why Mira wanted to wait before revealing the truth, she said. Understanding the value of sacrifice and family takes maturity, and tonight you showed that growth. Alina looked at the envelope again, then back at her mother. I don't know what decision I'll make yet, she admitted honestly. But I do know one thing. I don't want this opportunity to just be about money or business. Mira nodded gently, encouraging her to continue. I want to learn about the foundation you planned, Alina said. If families are forced to choose between career dreams and raising their children, then maybe this is something worth continuing. Mrs. Malhotra's eyes softened with approval. That foundation has already helped several families through scholarships and childcare support, she explained. But it was always meant to grow larger. Mira created its vision, even though she never took public credit for it. Alina turned toward her mother, stunned once again. You did all that, quietly? Mira shrugged slightly, her humble smile returning. Helping others never needed attention. It just needed to be done. Over the next hour, the party slowly transformed from a flashy birthday celebration into a heartfelt gathering filled with meaningful conversations. Guests approached Mira, expressing respect and admiration for her sacrifices and her hidden role in building something far greater than anyone realized. Ria and the other friends surrounded Alina, apologizing for their earlier careless comments. Instead of feeling defensive, Alina smiled warmly, realizing that growth often begins with uncomfortable truths. As the night began to wind down, Alina, Mira, and Mrs. Malhotra stood near the rooftop balcony, watching the city lights flicker beneath them. You always had the strength to build success, Mrs. Malhotra said to Mira quietly. You just chose to build it differently. Mira smiled softly. I never regretted my choice. But I'm grateful that Alina now understands it. Alina leaned against the railing, her thoughts calmer than they had been all evening. I used to think I needed a perfect life to feel proud, she said. Now I realize pride comes from knowing where you come from and respecting the people who made your journey possible. Mrs. Malhotra nodded approvingly. That understanding will guide every decision you make moving forward. A gentle breeze passed across the rooftop, carrying the fading sounds of laughter and music. The city below continued moving endlessly, but for Alina time felt slower, more meaningful. She reached for her mother's hand, holding it firmly. I want you to come with me to the company office next week, she said softly. Not as someone who works behind the scenes, but as someone who deserves to stand in front of everything you helped create. Mira's eyes widened slightly, surprised by the idea. Alina, You're not just anything, Alina interrupted gently. You're the reason I even have a future to choose from. Tears filled Mira's eyes again, but this time they carried peace instead of hidden pain. As the final guests began leaving, the rooftop lights dimmed slowly, signaling the end of the night. Alina looked out across the glowing skyline one last time, realizing how much her perspective had changed in just a few hours. She had started the day chasing an image of success shaped by society and status. She ended the night understanding that true wealth often hides behind quiet sacrifices, unconditional love, and choices that never seek recognition. Holding the envelope carefully in her hands, Alina felt both nervous and hopeful about the future. She didn't know exactly which path she would choose yet, but she knew she would never measure success the same way again. And as she walked beside her mother toward the elevator, their hands still tightly connected, Alina understood that the most valuable inheritance she had received wasn't the business shares, the trust fund, or the career opportunity waiting ahead. It was the legacy of love, resilience, and sacrifice that had quietly shaped her life long before she ever learned its true worth.